Hey listeners, my name is Chase Haustein and this is The Kid Killers. On this episode, I'm going to talk about the Chowchilla kidnapping. This was one of the largest abductions in history and left a lot of trauma on the citizens of the town. It's a sunny summer day in the town of Chowchilla, California. The date is July 15th, 1976, and kids from Dairyland Elementary School just got out of school. The town of Chowchilla was a slow one. It was a very farm-focused, and when looking at it, it was a normal town of the time. Chowchilla is located in California's Central Valley. The town is in a pretty hot environment, with summers in the 100s and winters in the 20s. Edward Ray was a farmer in the town who also helped as a school bus driver in the afternoons. On this particular day, Ed was taking the kids home, one by one like usual. He rounded corner after corner, getting kids home. Ed was a very trustworthy person and a caring guy too. He knew every kid's name at first glance, and always gave hugs out to all the kids that wanted one. He drove kids around the ages of 5 to 14 years old. This day was definitely not like all the other days. He dropped off one last girl and had 26 kids to go. As he rounded the corner, he came to a screeching halt, throwing kids around on their seats. As the kids looked up to see what the stop was about, they saw a big van. All the kids and their bus driver were worried at this point, but remained cautious. The van was parked in a way where the bus couldn't get through, so the bus had to remain stopped. Two men jumped out of the van and ran towards the bus. They were wearing pantyhose over their heads and were wielding guns. Their noses were squished down, and as one kid stated, their eyes looked like blackness, like they were going to die. The men went to either side of the bus with their guns pointed at Ed. They threatened to shoot Ed and the kids if the driver wouldn't open the door, so he ended up complying. They sent the first few rows of kids to the back of the bus. One of the men took over the wheel while the other held Ed at gunpoint in one of the first rows. A third man followed the bus in the van that had barricaded the road. They drove for a bit before coming across a second van. The bus was stopped and the first van was backed up to the doors of the bus. Half the kids were instructed to board this van, and they crammed 13 kids, plus Ed, into this one. The kids were very afraid and obviously didn't trust the men, but with Ed's encouragement, they were convinced to listen to the men and get on the bus. Brothers and sisters and best friends got split during this. The kids didn't even know if they would see the kids that boarded the first van ever again. After that van drove off, the process was repeated with the second van, and the bus was left in a dry riverbed surrounded by brush and was not visible from the road, so it was hard for the bus to end up being found. At this point, it has been about 30 minutes to an hour, and parents are getting worried because their kids still haven't showed up. They begin to call the school and the police station, but no one knows where the kids went. The police station wasted no time and contacted state troopers, National Guard, FBI, and other agencies. A whole bus of children had vanished with no trace. Call lines were flooded with tips and lines soon became jammed. The kids stayed on the bus for a long time. Interviews and other documentaries state that the vans were actually old prison transport vehicles. The insides were pitch black, but with the bus that had Ed inside of it, it had one flashlight that was controlled by Ed. They drove for hours and hours, and later on, people found out that it was about 12 hours that the van had driven around before finally stopping. The vans were brought to the same location, so the best friends and brothers and sisters were reunited, and the van with Ed began to unload first. As Ed got out of the van, he was in some sort of tent with lanterns lighting the interior. The floors were dirt, and there was a square hole in the ground about 5 feet away from him. The men with guns first asked Ed, Edward Ray, his full name and his age. And they did this with all of the kids as well. So Ed was then led to the square hole, and he was forced inside. And the square hole went about 3 feet down, and there was a circular hatch at the bottom of this 3 feet rectangular space. And the circular hatch opens into a large space, a big box. Later found out to be a moving van that was buried underground. So Ed jumps down into this little moving van under the ground, and he looks around and he sees that there are some mattresses, some cereal, and peanut butter. But other than that, the box was very bare. Ed helped the kids down into the hole, and before the hole, the kids were forced to give up their belongings, including backpacks, purses, and wallets. A lot of the kids were worried about their addresses being given away to these kidnappers, and then they also gave their age and name, which was written down on an old paper sack that was later found in the suspect's room, which is another piece of incriminating evidence. Once all the kids were in the hole, the circular disc slammed shut. There was silence for a few moments, then a slam was heard, and then the sound of dirt being piled on top of the only entrance and exit. And that is exactly what was happening. They were being buried alive. The kids huddled together in terror as they realized they might never see the sun again. Ed tried to comfort the children, but wasn't much help, and after a while, the dirt stopped coming, and there was silence. The kids began to spread out a bit and take in their surroundings. As all of this was happening, the town was in panic. 26 kids and their bus driver were nowhere to be found. After a lot of searching, the bus ended up being found in that riverbed, but it didn't lead them anywhere, and there was still no signs of the kids, no evidence, no nothing. Parents were very worried about their kids and didn't know what to do or how they could help, so they were kind of just stranded with nothing they could do. And officers obviously didn't find this out until later, but the kidnappers called the station when the lines were jammed, hoping to get ransom money. Since they couldn't get a hold of anyone to request the money, they ended up going back to their houses and took a nap, and decided to try again the following day when the lines might not be jammed. The kids and Ed were very anxious and didn't know what their future held because they were literally trapped inside a pitch black box. Only thing they had for light was that flashlight, which who knows how long that might last for them, if they leave it on, of course. So they were very conservative with that. The kids and Ed were very anxious, and Ed managed to get all of the kids to calm down, and he actually managed to get all of them to take a nap. Remember, they were aged 5 to 14. As they were sleeping, they heard creaking above them, and the creaking became more and more loud and ended up waking everyone up. It began to get more and more consistent, and then a cracking noise was heard, and dirt started to trickle into the box from the ceiling, and now no one could sleep. After this, Ed got in a depressed state, and wasn't much help to the kids. The kids realized it was on them to try and escape from this box. One 14-year-old boy was determined to get out of the underground trap that they were in. Michael Marshall was the name of the boy, and he was not going to die in this box. He stacked up mattresses near the circular disc and started pushing and kicking at it. As the kids watched, they saw some movement in the disc, and they started screaming and shouting, but Marshall wasn't strong enough to move it all on his own, so the kids had convinced Ed to help him push it, but Ed really thought there was no use. Ed and Marshall worked together to move the disc enough to the side for Marshall to squeeze his way through the opening and up on top of the disc, but this wasn't freedom. There was a small rectangular opening that Marshall was in, with a wooden board on top. So Marshall pushed and pushed, but couldn't get the board moved. He was inside a box above a circular disc with a wooden sides and ceiling. Another younger boy was sent up, and the two of them worked together to try and move the wooden top, but it wouldn't budge. And so the other boy found that if he tapped the sides of the upper box, he could hear dirt falling to the side, as if the dirt on top of the wooden platform was being pushed to the sides of the boxes instead. So eventually they took one of the mattresses apart and used some of the inside parts to ram the top of the wooden board. So they were using mattress parts to bang on the top of the wooden board, hoping that the board will crack or break, or they can just move the dirt off some more. After some time, a crack was formed and dirt started pouring in. The dirt fell all the way to where the kids were waiting, and then the kids inside of the bigger box would sweep all of the dirt into a corner of the box. They did this for some time until most of the dirt was gone, and then Marshall broke a big enough piece for Ed to get out the top. Ed was very worried that the kidnappers might be right above them, waiting and guarding to make sure they didn't escape, but he managed to get out and see that the coast was clear. He got all the kids out of there and then led them out of the tent that was set up above the hole. They found that they were in a rock quarry, and it was early morning. They carefully ran away, making sure to avoid any human life that could be the kidnappers. They ended up finding a quarry employee in the security shack, and the quarry employee helped them get in contact with the police and get home safely. The police were very worried at first, so they took them to the safest facility they could find in the area, which ended up being a prison. So all the kids were brought to a prison for some questioning, and after that they were reunited with their families, and the news started stating that the children had escaped. All of the children were very traumatized by the event. When the kidnappers woke up, they saw the news that the children had escaped, and they decided to run. There were 3 total, and so the police department, alongside of the FBI, investigated and found that the plan had been created by Frederick Newhall Woods the 6th, and actually the 4th, sorry about that. He was the son of the quarry owner. The FBI and the police department knew that their suspects would probably be people with a lot of access to the quarry, to the rock quarry. And they ended up being right. It was the quarry owner's son, Frederick Newhall Woods IV, who came up with the plan. So he and 2 of his friends, James and Richard Schoenfeld, had done the terrible act of trying to get money. They had recently been trying to make money in real estate, but it hadn't worked, and they were very low on money. They decided this was the best way they could do it. Two of the men actually went running to Canada, and the third turned himself in. They ended up finding all men who all ended up pleading guilty to kidnapping for ransom and robbery. They were then sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. I'm pretty sure when I was doing my research that I saw that the 3 of them, I think all 3 of them, have actually been released by prison at this point, and they're out in public in society now, which is a big fear of a lot of the victims, because they've been traumatized by this event. And I know that the one boy, Marshall, he reported having lots and lots of nightmares, and woke up screaming all the time. And the kids didn't get a lot of counseling or any attention for this. The most they ended up getting was a trip to Disneyland, which, I mean, obviously was nice, but it did not help fix what had happened and what they had been through. And I think all of them would say that that experience forever changed them. In the end, the tragic story ended the best way it could, with the victims returning to their families. And that's all I have to do today on the Chowchilla kidnapping. My name is Chase Haustein, and I am signing off.